Welcome back to the Daily Drum on Sirius XM channel 141 and WHUR. I'm Harold Fisher. This is a Medical Monday conversation. You may not see a lot about it in the news recently, but COVID is still with us. There has been a bit of a summer surge across the country. For example, last week in Maryland, there were 1,594 cases and 9 deaths. Well, tonight, joining me to talk about this is Dr. Reed Tuxton, co-founder of the Black Coalition Against COVID-19. Dr. Tuxton, good to see you again.
Thank you. Great to be with you and your audience.
So, first and foremost, kind of give me a lay of the land of where we are regarding COVID in 2024. Obviously, it's not like the horrific battle days of 2020. Things have definitely changed.
They clearly are, and thank God that that we're not where we were previously. But while things have changed, they've also remained the same. And what has remained the same is, first of all, is that COVID is still here. Secondly, COVID, as you indicated in your introduction, is on the increase. We are seeing now a significant and worrisome increase in several key areas, such as the number of people testing positive is up about 14% in the last couple of weeks. Emergency room visits are up about 2%, hospitalizations up 3%, and unfortunately, deaths are up about 1.2%. And those numbers are going to go higher. The second thing that has not changed is that the variants, the COVID variants that are killing people, they continue to mutate. They continue to kill and they continue to circulate. And so now we have a new variant that is moving through the country with causing these latest updates. And that variant is called the KP3. KP3. And so that hasn't changed in terms of the variants moving forward, causing people to become ill. So we are still having this disease. But Harold, the other thing that has changed as well are that the way in which we as a nation are going to respond. We've taken away the National Emergency Declaration. Schools and workplaces are wide open and will be for the absolute foreseeable future. Federal relief programs that were put in place in 2020 have expired. No stimulus checks are coming. There are no more federal vaccine or mask requirements. Mass testing is no longer happening. The government is not going to be purchasing vaccines or treatments. The CDC has dropped some of its kinds of guidance. And what's also finally going on that hasn't changed is that the maniacs are out there with all of their misinformation. The right wing is spreading conspiracy theories, all kinds of attacks. And so we are kind of left with the American people kind of left on their own. And that's what we're going to talk about today is what do you do when you're in that kind of a situation where the virus is moving, the variants are changing, but there's not a lot of help on the horizon.
Well, I remember you mentioned, let's talk about the variants first. You mentioned KP3, that's the new one. The KP2 was the flirt. That's the one that they called the flirt variant. Isn't that correct?
Well, actually, and it turns out that this word flirt is a reference only to the number of the kinds of amino acids inside of the variant. And so KP2 and KP3 are both members of that flirt family.
When we talk about the kinds of discussions that we are hearing publicly regarding COVID, even if we aren't hearing about it so much in the news, someone knows someone who has it. And I'll just speak from my own experience. One of the guests that I had on my show about 2 weeks ago, and we were talking about finding a good daycare. We couldn't interview her the week before. She wasn't available because she had COVID. as you know, there was the recent Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority boule that was in Texas, and I know a couple of my friends who are members either had COVID or knew some of their sorority sisters who had COVID. I had a friend of mine. She went on a trip to New York, and I had not heard from her after she went on her trip. This was just last month. This was in June, late June. And when I finally caught up with her, and I said, "Hey, where'd you go? Do you not love me anymore? We usually, we usually talk once a week or so." And I hadn't heard from her, and she said, "Well, I had COVID." And I said, "Really?" And she said, "Yeah." And I said, "How are you feeling?" She says she's fine now, but she did have it. Spoke to a friend of mine today, family coming in from out of town, and one of her uh, older uncles has COVID. And she said, so the family is now figuring out how they're going to navigate that, because they would be flying in from Wisconsin. So even if you don't have the numbers,
Yes.
just just a regular person walking around having conversations with their family or friends, COVID is still with us.
This is important, this sort of evidence, because unfortunately, of course, we don't have the kinds of testing programs that we had before. And so you don't have these very well-populated data tables that we could look at before. What we do know is that there is a very excellent way in which public health officials can tell what's happening. And that is one of the ways is the wastewater. And so we can see the virus in the wastewater. And those levels, Harold, are definitely increasing. The other thing is that I want to make sure we know, and of course, remember that even if you are the president of the United States today, President Biden has it. But also, we just learned, I think just today or in the last 24 hours, that those of you that think that if you are an elite athlete and have eaten only the right things and are in the best possible shape that any human being can be in, one of the Olympic gold medalists, a swimmer over in France, has just come down with it the day after his great race. And so it really lets us know that, as you say, we know people all over the place. If you're living in California, one thing for sure is you definitely know somebody that has had it. So various states are really getting hard hit.
Why California?
Don't know, don't understand why, but they certainly are. Maybe it is that people, because it's been so hot, but it's been hot everywhere, that people are indoors and congregating around each other again. It may be because of all the rain. And again, people indoors. And so that, human proximity may be the major reason.
Let's drill down a little bit more, if we can, about the wastewater issue, because as you just mentioned, that seems to be an indicator of where Maryland was when they were seeing the contagious evolving of the Omicron variant. We heard a whole lot about that during the pandemic and shortly thereafter. But so what is happening? Are municipalities testing the wastewater, and why are we seeing it in the wastewater?
Well, the thing is that, first of all, we have, unfortunately, very few other ways other than looking at the actual doctor's visits, that if physicians will report that if the state is actually interested in having it reported. Many of the states don't want to know and don't want to have it reported. But there's also whether or not there's hospitalizations and the death rate. So that's one way. But the wastewater is a very good public health way. And so it's very easy to do that. The virus does remain in our waste products. We do excrete it as a part of the normal functioning of eliminating substances from our bodies. And so it is actually possible scientifically to not only test it, but to be able to test it in a way that allows you to trace amounts in a predictable way over time. In other words, so you can actually the variables are consistent enough that you can actually tell whether or not you're having an increase over time.
One of the things also, anecdotally speaking, that I have noticed is the mask wearing. There seems to be a bit of an uptick, and I'm just talking about what I have seen. Again, not the kind of mask wearing that we saw during the pandemic, particularly after they became more available. But I'm still noticing that there are people who are into masking, and so I'd like to kind of at least briefly revisit that masking, particularly considering where we are now in 2024 with the availability of it, of the vaccine and some of the other treatments.
Well, the wearing of masks takes us into three key areas. Number one, it has become very political. And so wearing a mask has been decried by the right wing and the Trump people in the world as being something that was a horrific thing to do. And so it's become a political statement that if being against masks is somehow good if you are a conservative Republican. Number two, that the masks have been characterized by a great deal of misinformation. There was a study out that was poorly reported about a year ago that looked back and made the statement that some people heard incorrectly, that wearing masks was not effective. What the study actually was saying is that we could not prove that wearing masks at the macro level, at the entire population level, we could not say one way or the other whether masks were effective in reducing the pandemic. And that was because people wear their masks sometimes. They sometimes wear it improperly. Different jurisdictions had different requirements. It was a very confusing situation, which made it difficult to make a definitive statement about the population. What it did say is that masks are effective from an individual to individual perspective. And so wearing masks does help me prevent spreading it to you or you spreading it to me. So that part is there. What you will not have this year, I do not think, because of the politics, because of the inflammatory situation that we live in this country, I don't think you're going to see very much in the way of mask mandates this season. It will take an awful lot to get us to that place, and it will be a very difficult decision for public health officials to even try to suggest. So once again, Harold, as I said earlier in our conversation, you're kind of on your own. And I think that what I would just sort of remind you, the common sense thing is, first of all, above all, in this COVID pandemic or any other, please be a morally responsible human being. How dare anybody play loose and fast with another human being's health, particularly the elderly, those over 65, and particularly those who have pre-existing chronic illnesses. And so you don't need to have a lot of common sense to know that if you have COVID or any other bad disease, you don't want to be breathing on grandma. So let's just be very straightforward and simple there.
Hold that point, Dr. Tuckson. Don't forget your point, because I want to let you continue after I take a break. But to our listeners and viewers, don't forget, you can hear this and every edition of the Daily Drum Insight segment via podcast on WHUR.com. The Original Quiet Storm with John Mons is next on WHUR. I'm Harold Fisher. This conversation continues on Sirius XM channel 141 in just a few seconds. Welcome back to the Daily Drum on Sirius XM channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. We continue our conversation on this Medical Monday about COVID-19. Yes, COVID is still with us. My guest is Dr. Reed Tuckson, co-founder of the Black Coalition Against COVID-19. Dr. Tuckson, you were talking before the break about 2 points. You were saying be a morally responsible person as it relates to how you address, COVID. The second point you were going to make.
And so the second point is that if you are a person who is immunocompromised or elderly, you want to demand that before people come in your space and they know they have COVID, not to be breathing that on you. So we're sort of on our own as we do this now this year. But I would also say that I've made the observation, and it is not a scientific study, but I do travel a lot. And it's amazing to me that when I see people with masks on, most of the time they're Black folks. That we somehow have been really, really getting the message in our community that we ought to be cautious. So when I'm in airports, I do see a lot of African American brothers and sisters who are wearing their masks to be extra safe. So I'm glad. By the way, Harold, before we go any further, I just got to throw this point in about the Black community's response. I want to make sure that everyone in this audience understands, and thank God for you, and thank God for the good folks at the station at HUR and all the airtime you gave to helping us to understand this illness. We, for the first time in history, Black folks closed a disparities in health gap for the first time when it came to the primary series COVID vaccines. Despite all the trouble we had at getting the vaccine, despite all the worries about growing a third leg and a fourth arm, and despite all the concerns and fears about whether or not this was a quote unquote Tuskegee-like thing, despite all of that, and not having the as easy access to the vaccine when it first came out, despite all of that, we closed the gap and caught white America in that regard. But even more important, Harold, and this is the take home, that Black life expectancy the second year in, after that vaccine was available, was better than white America. And why was that? Because we did what we were supposed to do, but also I hate winning a race because the other guy tripped, because all those white politicians told their people not to get the vaccine and not to comply with the mandates like wearing masks. So I just want the Black community to understand, we saved our lives as best we possibly could. And we really shown that when the Black community mobilizes to go forward to save our lives, maybe even as the Black community mobilizes to elect a president, we will make a huge difference in this world.
I do want to talk about another, medical issue regarding, COVID, and I speak about this from my own personal experience, where, as you know, that my father developed COVID in January of 2022, underwent some really difficult treatment for it, was in the ICU for more than a month, came out of it. It left him with dementia, and eventually he passed away from other complications. My sister had it in 2021, I think, December of 2021. From November to December of 2021. It was very, very, very sick. My daughter had it much later, and my daughter was in her early 20s. All three in these cases, I'm just talking about my family, my sister, my daughter, my father, none of them lived together. Why? Not that I want it. I never contracted it. Okay, I tested over and over and over when it was at its height. Many colleges across the country, including Howard University, we were testing every single week. But I was fortunate enough never to have it. And I think you and I years ago talked about this, that there are just some people, knock on wood, who just never got it, no matter how they lived, whether they lived alone like myself or lived with family. There were just some people who just never came down with COVID. Your thoughts about that?
Well, my first thought, man, is that because I care about your family and I'm aware of your pops, and it breaks my heart to hear you say it again, and because it really does. Number two is that I'll just quickly give you one personal example from my family, and that is we are currently caring for my soon-to-be in another month 99-year-old mother. My daughter flew in from New Jersey to come spend a week with us. And I really loved the way she approached it. She took a COVID test before she got on the plane, and then wore her mask on the plane and all the way to the house. She emailed me or faxed me her COVID negative test to say, my test is negative, but I am going to be that diligent with grandma. And it was just a beautiful example. The point you're ultimately getting at, and this is the point that's so important, is that this COVID virus it operates in very unpredictable ways in the human being. It attacks so many different parts of the body and has so many different ways in which it expresses itself. We all have heard the term long COVID. Long COVID is for real. And it is definitely there. And the thousands and thousands and thousands of Americans that are living with this disease. But when you ask them, does this person standing beside you have the same symptoms of long COVID as you do? They will have a completely different picture of how it affected their body based on their genetics, based on their health environment, and so forth. And so it's a very variable. We just simply don't know. I mentioned that case of this elite Olympic athlete because a lot of people will think, well, I'm, in great shape, I'm young and I'm tough. And here you have a great Olympic athlete that has come down with it. What I would sort of leave you with Harold, is that one of the things that I've always enjoyed being on your show is your audience. And I can hear right now, one of the people, if they were able to call in, they would be saying, well, the key thing we have to do is work on our immune system. And let's do that. And I love that. And yes, please, everybody, work on your immune system. Please make sure that you are getting your rest. Please make sure that you exercise appropriately. Please make sure you're eating a well-balanced, nutritious diet. And if you are someone that likes to take a supplemental vitamins and has a rationale for how to do that intelligently in a way that helps them, then you do those things. In addition to those wonderful things, let's also stay vigilant about COVID. And when we have the chance, and I'm sure we'll get into it in a moment, when we have a chance to talk about how to make sure we don't get it, to give us the really best chance, which of course is getting vaccinated, then we add that so we have the belt and suspenders.
Yeah. And to that point, as you just said, vaccinations, treatments, and the like have come a really, really long way because, as we also know, during the height of the pandemic, I mean, people were just dropping like flies, and it was a horrible time in world history. And so now, for full disclosure, I'm vaccinated and boosted. I need to look at my card and what have you. And we could sit here and debate whether you should or should not be. Let's go, for the sake of this conversation, assuming that you should be. What are the processes now for vaccination? And are there other kinds of medical, not holistic, but other medical treatment outside of the injections that have become so common?
Well, I'm glad you framed it from the sense of you've got your card with your initial dose and then you've got your booster. The way that it will be viewed this time around is we won't be talking about getting boosters. We'll be talking about getting a new vaccine each year, like you do with the flu. And the reason is because the variants are changing enough that now this year, come the end of August or early in September, somewhere in the early fall, like right towards the end of August, going into September, we will have available the new COVID vaccines. And so it won't be adding a booster to what you've already had. It'll be basically a new kind of vaccine. It has already been studied well. It has been already approved by 2 different federal agencies, the FDA, and then after that, the CDC. And so we have great confidence that the one that's coming is going to be effective against where we are today and where this virus has mutated. You also open up the door, though, to a very important thing, and that is once we get ill, we now really have available to us 3 kinds of treatments that can significantly affect the disease course of getting infected. As you remember, we had the Paxlovid from the last time. That is working well. And that while, we have to do that, though, within 5 days of when symptoms start, but you can take that by mouth orally through your
Paxlovid. And let me say, that seems to be the thing that's really kind of at the top of the food chain, Paxlovid.
Yeah.
Because when you hear about someone who is well known about getting COVID, I mean, it's like, well, that the person is taking Paxlovid. But please continue.
No, well, that's important. And I do want to say that, taking it is not an idle decision. You have to think about that. First of all, you have to think about it early on because it doesn't work unless you get it within the first 5 days of when symptoms start. It has been greatly effective, but some people, we have heard that it may cause a rebound after you've started it, and you can have a rebound again. So for some people, that fear of a rebound may cause them to have to think twice about it. And so what I would suggest that people, and also it may leave a bit of a metallic kind of taste in your mouth. These are mild things, when you consider how bad COVID can be. I know that I don't ever want to have it again the way that I had it. It was just the worst experience, my experience with COVID. So you want to talk to your clinician about that. The second thing we have is something called remdesivir. This is just another antiviral drug. Again, a drug that works against viruses. And this one is done by infusion. And that you have to be going to a healthcare provider for that. And then finally, there is a third one called molnupiravir, another antiviral. So the only take-home point is this. We have 3 antivirals, 1 by mouth and 2 by IV. And all of those work well, but you have to get them at least within the first 5 days. Talk to your doctor. And so this will be an important time to say, Harold, if you do not have a regular physician or a medical home, as I call it, if you don't have a medical home, get one now. It doesn't make sense to be going out here in this world hanging, when it's all of a sudden when you need it, there's no one there for you and you wind up in an emergency room. So please get you a medical home, not just for COVID, of course, but because we want to start dealing with the other diseases that have been affecting Black folks so disproportionately. You need a doc because we want to make sure we don't have diabetes. We don't get cardiovascular disease. There are so many real diseases that have always been with us that we got to take care of. So if you do not have a relationship with a physician, establish one now. You never know when you're going to need it.
I am reminded about a conversation that you and I had back in 2020, or perhaps it was even 2021, when the vaccine was evolving, coming out, and the like. And I remember I said, to the point that you made earlier, is it possible that we would be making, along with the flu shots in the fall or very late summer, that we would see a COVID vaccine that we would be taking with a sense of regularity, just like we did with the flu. And it just seems that has come true.
It really does. It does seem that we're going to be that way. And unfortunately, because this disease is now going to be with us. We didn't stomp it out when we had the chance early on, years ago. And now it's here, it's circulating. And let's just be honest, the COVID virus has only one job, and that is to mutate and kill. And it's very good at that. It's very good at mutating, and it is very good at killing. And so what it will do is it will change. And now we are going to view COVID as basically a seasonal disease that's endemic as opposed to epidemic. When a couple of years ago, it was an epidemic. Now it is endemic. It is a part of our lives, and we're going to wind up learning to live with it. And I think that's why, Harold, I went through that list of all the things that we don't have in place anymore, because we're not going to be, as a country, for so many different reasons, looking at this disease as a major crisis. It's just something that we as a nation have decided that we're just going to learn to live with it. And some will die and some won't. And we just have to make sure that we ain't going to be in the group that's always dying.
I want to talk more about long COVID. And again, this is anecdotally speaking. I have two friends who had COVID, and in both cases, both of them almost didn't make it. And these were two Black women who were one in her 40s and one in her 50s. The one who was in her 40s, her recovery from it took about a year. And her symptoms were, from what I remember, fatigue and kind of headache and not being able to put on weight after losing, oh my gracious, 40 pounds or so. And this was not a person who was obese to begin with. But then another friend of mine had a much more severe reaction. It had, really it had damaged her heart. And I remember having conversations with her while she was going through the recovery period of not being able to walk down the block and just being out of breath. And but now here we are in 2024. Both of them are their old selves, and they are in the pink and are in a health situation, as if, based on what they've shared with me, that they feel fine. And again, this is just anecdotally speaking, but are there some people who just may always have long-term effects for the rest of their lives regarding COVID, long COVID, I should say? Or is it possible that those who were in good health before they got COVID could fully recover from long COVID, in that it just may take a while? Do we have any information about that?
I like the way you set it up, and that is, you showed a very variable picture. We are still learning a lot more about long COVID. Interestingly enough, the person who is responsible for leading the effort against long COVID and studying it is an African-American physician inside of HHS. And so we wish that brother very, very good luck as he continues to do that work. What happens with this virus? It attacks, in particular, the blood vessels. And so and as you know, every single organ in our body is filled with blood vessels. And so the way in which this virus expresses itself throughout the body depends on sort of your particular anatomy, your particular biology. But you can imagine that if it attacks on blood vessels, it can then find itself affecting the brain. It can affect itself the heart. You can see it affecting the kidneys, the liver. So it really can be a multi-system challenge. Some people, we don't know all the reasons why. And of course, we're looking very closely at the genetics. And are there any genetic predictors about a genetic profile that leads one person to be more able to withstand it versus another less able to withstand the attack? We have a lot more to learn. The lessons of your story, though, Harold, is, number one, let's just don't get it in the first place. And that's why I am very, very, very focused right now on being ready in the Black community to get our community immunized when the new ones come out. I want to make sure that there are not going to be any more of these programs where we are disadvantaged in our access to these drugs. Number two, the hardest part for you in the media and others who are responsible journalists is going to be overcoming you can be assured that the right wing, the Russian bots, the Chinese folks, they are going to be working overtime to go into Black Twitter and every other social media place. One of the most scary things is now with Twitter because of Elon Musk. Elon is now in bed with Trump. They are like joined at the hip. Elon is going to continue on his platform to push all the misinformation and disinformation imaginable. So we're going to have a lot to overcome when it comes to the misinformation and the deliberate manipulating of how Black folks feel about this disease. They do not have our best interests at heart. So we're going to have to be prepared for overcoming and making sure that people have the truth. And then third, we're going to have to make sure that our community organizations, our community and health organizations, and our community faith-based organizations are prepared to mobilize to be able to provide our community with the facts and information, but also to be centers where we can actually get access to the virus, to the vaccine. But I remind you again, I just cannot emphasize this enough. For all of those people, I assume some of them well-meaning, who called into your show, and we talked to them over and over again, who had all these dire predictions of how terrible this vaccine was and all the weird things it was going to do. Not only did those things not happen, but what did happen is Black folks' life expectancy actually improved better than white folks. If Black lives matter, and they do, then they have to matter to us first. And shame on anybody who doesn't have the expertise, who would deliberately go out there and tell other Black people, don't do this, don't get vaccinated, don't wear your mask, don't do any of the things. How dare can they then walk around and say, oh, by the way, I'm a supporter of Black Lives Matter?
I remember the conversation, and I'm sure you remember this also. And it really is quite laughable, to be quite honest, when I think right at the height of the pandemic or right before, there were a lot of conspiracy theories about 5G and whether or not, because in 2019, 2020, that's when we began to see the 5G polls to increase cell phone coverage from all of the major carriers. And I remember having the conversation with a gentleman who called into the show, and he made the comment about 5G. And I remember even having this debate about whether or not 5G was the cause of COVID-19. And I was getting, argued down about it, and watch your cell phones because it's in your cell phone. Well, as we know, that conspiracy theory just kind of drifted away. And I think, on the surface, yes, you want to laugh at it. But I think the other thing that really needs to be addressed is often these conspiracy theories happen because people are afraid, and they don't know where to go. Because, correct me if I'm wrong, we see all kinds of advertisements about making sure that once you're over 50, get your shingle shots. Mm-hmm. I haven't heard anyone pushing back on getting those shingle shots. And that's amazing to me, because again, you can have that same kind of debate, unhealthy debate, about getting your shingle shots. Nobody's crying about that.
Man, just think about the new weight loss drugs. With Ozempic.
Oh yeah, how about that?
Man, people. Look, I'm not here to shame anybody or to decry them. I appreciate how important weight is to people and looking for solutions. But this mass movement towards that. There was none of the stuff on that, and what could be the long-term consequences, the inadvertent elements of that. None of that kind of came up as everyone rushed to the weight loss. It is, I'll tell you, Harold, the one that gets me the most is that there's a number of men, young men, who are taking the weight loss drug and combining it with testosterone so that they can lose the weight and build muscle, they think. These are the same people, I bet you, that were talking, I ain't taking that vaccine. I don't know what's going to happen. We make a lot of different choices. Let's not laugh about it in this sense. I want to be very serious about it because, first of all, Harold, I respect your audience. I respect Black people. I respect all people. I understand that making health decisions is challenging, especially when we go online and look up something and have a website or internet thing where you go to one thing and it refers you to someplace else. And next thing you know, you're going down a rabbit hole of misinformation without you even knowing you did it. That's how complex this misinformation engine is. There are companies who make their money on finding you asking a simple question and then subtly directing you down the rat hole to right-wing politics, to Fox News kinds of stuff. So we have to really be sympathetic to our folks as we try to figure out complicated things like this. And the only way we can do it is we have to keep listening to each other. We got to start with loving each other. I am fanatical about whether or not my people live or die. It just matters to me, Harold, in my bones. I'm a physician. This is what I'm trained. My life mission, just like so many others, is how can I help Black America survive? Now, it is frustrating when I'm trying to do my work and you study and you investigate and you talk to all the experts to have to debate against somebody who has no accountability whatsoever. It doesn't matter if they're right or wrong. They're not the ones that are going to have to treat the disease. Nobody cares that they gave out some stupid information and killed. They just go on with their lives. There's no accountability. We have to talk to each other, brother to brother, sister to brother, giving ourselves facts. But let's start with this presumption. Let's start with, I love you. I care about you. If we disagree, let's talk about it respectfully. And I'll end that point with one of the things in your audience has always emphasized every time I've been on the show. But Dr. Tuckson, I think we just need to focus on improving your immune system by doing the right thing. And I just want to say, you have made me so sensitive to that. And that is the first thing I'm going to say every time I come on your show. Let's do that. After we've done all that, let's take care of the other stuff, like getting the vaccine.
There you go. Dr. Reed Tuckson, I think that's a great place to end this conversation. I really appreciate your time. Real quick, you said you had COVID. It was a while ago. How are you feeling?
I am fortunate and lucky that I did not have that. The symptoms of that brain fog scared me to death. It lingered for about 3 weeks, and I panicked, brother, because I was like, will I ever be back to where I can be energetic and getting my stuff? 3 weeks, man, I was like in nowhere's land. But thank goodness, as far as I know, I feel like I'm great. And by the way, as soon as we hang up, I'm going back out and finish my hour of exercise for today, which I do every day.
There you go, Dr. Reed Tuckson. Thank you so very much. That is the Daily Drum for this Monday, July 29th. I'm Harold Fisher.